Welcome into another edition of the Chicago Draft Room 2026 on the clock, along with Jacob Infante, who you can find on social media at Jacob Infante24. I am Ari Temkin, which you can find me on social media at Ari Sports. On today's show, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the defensive line, which is obviously a huge position of need. And can the Bears do enough in this draft on the defensive line to approve it enough? Plus, Jacob did a really good job in deep diving some potential other deep prospects the Bears might be interested in, including a tight end and a running back. So we'll get into all of that. But hopefully you're enjoying some March Madness on this, the first day of the NCAA tournament.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I just saw High Point take care of business against Wisconsin. Sienna's up against on a crazy start against Duke right now. I don't know what's going on there, but obviously we'll see if they can hold on to
Yeah,
that.
they're up
But
9 at
it's been a lot of
halftime.
Yeah, it's nuts.
I'm sure that by the time people listen to this in the podcast form, they'll be like, yeah, Duke ended up winning by 30, but at least at halftime, it's a 9-point lead for Sienna. Make sure to follow along live on YouTube as we go live at some point on Thursdays, sometimes Wednesdays. We try to keep you up in the know, but we've got a lot going on. So we're doing an earlier show on for today live on YouTube. And of course, check out the podcast, Chicago Draft Room, along with many other great podcasts across the Second City Gridiron Network, as well as, of course, Windy City Gridiron, where you get all your great content, news, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Let's just quickly kind of react to the latest news around the Bears from this week. First off, Jacob, the Bears, are they broke?
In terms of cap space, I wouldn't say that, but in terms of cash, I mean, I don't know. I think it's always difficult when you look at it the McCaskies are very, very rich, by normal people's standards, right? But by
they're
NFL
sitting
owners'
on a
standards,
$10 billion asset, or whatever the Bears might be worth if they're sold. I think
yeah,
10 billion at least.
yeah, 100%, yeah, at least. And but I think that it's also like the only major asset they have. It's not like a Jerry Jones or something like that,
Right.
or where or something like the Raiders ownership where you're just sitting on a mountain of money. So I think that that might have inflated things a little bit to the point where maybe that they don't have as much like hard outright cash as some other teams across the NFL. But I mean, I'm not too panicked about it. I mean, we've seen that the Bears have been able to spend a good amount of money in free agency regardless, over the last few years. And, they were more than willing to pay Ben Johnson what it took to bring him in. So I don't think it's totally killed the Bears by all that, by any stretch. So they're not absolutely loaded by NFL standards, but I'm not looking at that whole conversation and being like, oh man, I'm so panicked right now. We don't have enough money. We're never going to be able to win a Super Bowl again or anything like that. But so I don't know how you feel about it, but that's just where I'm at. Like, I'm not too panicked
Yeah.
about it. I mean, it's like, it is what it is.
I mean, at this point, it's not the lack of money that's holding the Bears back. It's where they've spent their money, especially on the defensive side. Like,
Yeah.
they shouldn't be as bad as they are defensively with the amount of money they have invested on the defensive side of football. Now, I do think it's interesting because you bring up Jerry. Jerry Jones, bought the Cowboys and got in with other people at like 100 million, and so obviously he's seen his assets grow. But like, what he did from a business standpoint is so much smarter what the McCaskies did in terms of like diversifying his portfolio and,
Oh
and
yeah.
basically leveraging the Cowboys and his ownership and equity in that to like build a freaking empire of like a gazillion dollars. And like, meanwhile, the McCaskies have just kind of sat there on their thumbs, just like,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, like not diversifying it. And it's sure it's a little bit different. It's one guy versus a family. And so, I'm sure that there's a lot more complications with that, but I've just always found that to be funny that like the McCaskies have been just sitting on this asset for all this time and haven't really diversified in order to give themselves more cash and more cash rich. But maybe they'll build a new stadium and then sell the team. So we'll see. But if they didn't sell in Virginia Dye, which I believe you could sell and then get tax free after a death, that probably would have been the time to sell anyways. But I digress. Okay, what other big stories from this week should we be hitting on, Jacob? Anything? I mean, obviously the Bears are broke story was kind of a funny thing that this week.
Yeah. I think one thing I know we talked a little bit about, the defense spending. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that I'm looking at that roster, and I mean, yeah, they made some solid moves. I mean, I don't know, but I'm still concerned about that defensive line, man. Like, I think that they're still, like I assume they're going to address it in the draft, but as it stands right now, I'm not feeling too hot about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say any sane person that's looking at the Bears roster can identify a glaring weakness. And look, we can argue and sit here about is this team better right now than they were when the season ended? And I think like it's sort of an incomplete question because it's not sort of, it's a extremely incomplete question because like there's still a very important, in fact, probably the most important piece of the offseason to come. So like trying to assess where the Bears are this year's roster relative to last year's is a fool's errand at this point because the draft will help to dictate how good or bad this offseason is. But can, can they build enough through the draft on the defensive line to be good enough?
I think in due time, it could get them there. I think that I mean we've talked a couple times now on this show about looking at the Eagles as a comparison, looking at the Seahawks as a comparison, all the guys that they've
Right.
drafted, like your Byron Murphy, Derek Hall, Boye Mafe, guys they brought in, stuff like that. Like that, I mean, it adds up over time, and it definitely helps. Uh, but like we said, the Seahawks also brought in Leonard Williams and Demarcus Lawrence, and looking at the Eagles too, they've drafted a ton of guys. Eventually, it got there, but also having those veteran presences as well have helped them. So I think that yes, they could draft well, and that could help their defensive line improve significantly in the long term. Which I mean, that's the preference, right? You're wanting to build a sustainable contender. So if the defensive line gets a little bit better, uh, this year and it means that it gets a lot better next year, then I'd be okay with that with only like a marginal upgrade. But still though, for a team that, won the NFC North last year, for a team that's, entering this offseason being like, all right, we're in contender mode, I am a little somewhat concerned at least as far as what they have right now, just because they haven't been spending all that much money. So you can definitely get better and have a great defensive line in the long term by drafting guys. But I think that relying as heavily as they are on these drafted players to step in and make a big difference, uh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't
No,
think
I
this is
mean,
going to be a
that's
terrible
exactly right.
defense, but
Right. I mean, that's exactly right though. Like I think you know, yes, they should invest heavily with draft capital in the defensive line. That does not necessarily mean that the defensive line will be fixed from day one. I mean, it's
yeah,
defensive line, especially interior guys, like it takes time. You're talking about going up against offensive linemen that aren't straight out of college. Most of these guys have had multiple years of seasoning of the nutrition of all of the aspects that go into a grown man's body, and so look, I I think yes, they should invest heavily in the draft. And in a moment here, we'll go through some of a kind of a deep dive defensive line piece. But then I also wonder if some of if they do end up restructuring some guys to prove that they aren't exactly broke. You wonder if there's some of these veteran guys they can get on the cheap that would make a difference. So let me ask you this: Jadeveon Clowney, Calais Campbell, Cam Jordan, DJ Reader, Joey Bosa, any of those names doing anything for you?
in the short term, yeah, absolutely. I think there's still some good like pass rushing mercenary type values out there. I mean, I think, naturally with Dennis Allen being the defensive coordinator, the first name that pops to my mind is Cam Jordan, obviously given
Yeah,
his experience working with Dennis Allen. Only problem there is he's played his entire career with the Saints, so that's always something where it's like, it's easier to project than it is actually happening, but
right.
I mean, hey, you saw Mike Evans leave the Buccaneers in free agency. He spent his entire career there. Who's to say that Cam Jordan can't go somewhere else for, the final year or two of his career? So Cam Jordan would make sense as like a good stopgap option. My personal favorite would be Jadeveon Clowney. I think he's someone who, I mean, he bounces around so many teams, but everywhere he's gone, he's been like a solid, above average starting edge rusher. I think if you have Clowney and Sweat rushing off the edge at the same time, and then you factor in Odeyingbo, you factor in Booker, I mean, you use Daniel Hardy typically, mostly on special teams. And if you want to have Shamar Turner at defensive end, you can have him there sometimes too, in addition to the inside. Then that gives you something to work with. I don't know necessarily if the Bears are going to go down to that direction because, I mean, at least looking at the Bears group of edge rushers right now, I mean, just the guys that I listed off, they don't have like a ton of impact players, but they do have a ton of rosterable players, if that makes sense. So, and it all
Yes.
depends, I think, if you include Shamar Turner as an edge rusher or as a defensive tackle. I know he played a couple games at defensive end before he got hurt, started off as a defensive tackle, but all those guys I mentioned, Sweat, Odeyingbo, Booker, Hardy, I feel are decent, likely chances of making the 53-man roster. Hardy, especially because of because of his special teams ability. And, say if you draft a guy, that's 5 right there, maybe 6, depending on how you view Shamar Turner. Are they going to want to add another stopgap guy and muddy things even more? I don't know. I mean, I'm of the belief you can never have too many pass rushers, and I don't know for sure if, I mean, I don't know the health status of Odeyingbo or Shamar Turner or anything like that. Like, if they're going to start on the PUP or whatever that's going to look like, but uh, I don't anticipate they're going to add like another stopgap starting option. I'd be
You think they
perfectly
have
happy
enough
with it.
already?
Yeah, yeah. I think and that's not to say it's a long-term finished product, but I think they have, like, I think the way that they'll look at it is it'd be a little too crowded if they bring in a guy like Clowney or Jordan or Bosa, and then they draft a guy in round 1 or round 2. So I think
Yeah.
it'll be one or the other.
And look, I think Bosa for me, like his cost versus like the injury risk is probably too much because I think of the guys we just named, Bosa probably has the most value. But again, his injury history suggests that that's probably not an investment worth making. Clowney's
Yeah.
interesting to me because like Clowney was signed off the street last year and rolled out of bed and got 8.5 sacks for a bad Cowboys defense. So now maybe it was just somebody had to get sacks on a bad defense, and he was the beneficiary of it. But just feel like if you need a guy that you can, a mercenary, like he's the perfect potential guy there. Although
Yeah.
Jordan still had 10.5 sacks last year. It's crazy to think about.
Which is nuts. I mean, because he's like what? He's well into his 30s now at this point.
Yeah, he'll be
I'm checking this out
37
right
when the
now.
season starts.
Wow. Wow. And he's still putting up
Yeah.
double digit sacks. It's always interesting. I feel like every once in a while there's like a defensive end who just goes nuts in their late 30s for like a year or
Yeah.
two. Like, I mean, Cam Jordan, like Julius Peppers, I think had some really good seasons, like right at the end of his career. I mean, Khalil Mack put up like, yeah, like not this past year, but the year before that. Well, or no, 2023 rather. He had 17
Yeah.
sacks. Michael Strahan near the end of his career had some really good seasons. I mean, it's funny how that happens, where you figured they'd lose a step or something, but they're just as strong as they were before. They've got that grown man strength, and all those years in the league, they've seen every pass set in the book. They've gone against every offensive tackle in the book. Like, they know how to beat anybody.
Yeah, no, you're totally right about that. Like it's weird how sometimes that happens, and it's you think about the like raw athleticism needed for that spot, but sometimes it is just the veteran savvy and like, oh, I've seen those counters so many times now that like I know how to react to them. Like linemen have nothing on these guys, so that's a great point. Jared Allen, I mean, he wasn't as good later in his career, but like think about like at 31, the year before he joined the Bears, he had 11.5 sacks at the Vikings at 31, and then of course he joins the Bears and had 5.5 sacks, and he wasn't great, but not exactly the same age as those guys you're talking about at 36, 37 years old.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this defensive line class in particular. I think you tweeted earlier this week. Bad news, Bears defensive line is still a major concern. Good news, I've always said that I love when teams attack the trenches heavy in the draft, and it looks like Poles is going to have to do that with the defensive line by default. So based on that, let's do a deep dive on this defensive line. There's some names we've certainly talked about at 25. Do you still feel good about the guys we've talked about at 25? And who would that list include now in your mind?
Yeah.
Peter
So
Woods.
I will say real quick before I dive into that, Howie's going nuts in the chat wanting us to say how many games has Cam Jordan missed in his 15 seasons. Admittedly, I didn't know he wanted us to guess, but I did look it up to confirm he's missed 2 games in 15 seasons.
That's
That's
insane.
unbelievable. So Howie, there you go. And then Howie says yes in the chat there. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, I mean, going back to the draft defensive linemen, I think that I'm leaning edge now. Looking at the group of defensive tackles, I think that there's a lot of talent up there, but if you narrow it down as far as what Dennis Allen would like, the scheme fits are a little bit more narrowed than maybe like the consensus top 5 guys that you see, where someone like Caden McDonald might not have the pass rushing upside or the get off quickness that Dennis Allen likes a defensive tackle. Same with Lee Hunter. Caleb Banks, maybe he's a little too big for what Dennis Allen usually likes at the position, and he's obviously broke his foot at the combine. In addition to the broken foot that he had early in the 2025 regular season, that's 2 broken feet in the last year. That definitely starts to become a concern there. So that's 3 of the consensus top 5 defensive tackles where it's a little like, do we feel comfortable using a first round pick on them? So that leaves you with Peter Woods and Kristen Miller. No guarantee Peter Woods is going to be there. So I'm looking at edge rusher for the most part in round 1. I think that as opposed to defensive tackle, where some of the scheme fits are, so, I think that edge, there's a lot to like there in that range. TJ Parker comes to mind out of Clemson as somebody who has the physicality, the tone setting play strength off the edge that Allen historically likes, that size and the length. Zion Young being another guy, Mizzou guy. I know we were talking as well, a little bit before the show about my Mizzou ties. So I'm trying to leave my bias out of it, but I do think that he has that, he wins. I'd say he's best with power, but he's absolutely shown that he can win with speed and finesse off the edge. Uh, so there's a lot to like there. Maybe a guy like Akeem Mesidor out of Miami falls if teams obsess over, okay, the age and he's had a big injury or two before in his past, or a guy like Keldrick Falk where his production dropped off a little bit, similar to TJ Parker where his stock fell a little bit too. Kind of the same happened to Falk, but any of those 4 guys I'd say would be tremendous for the Bears in round 1. And you could consider like a Cassius Howell out of Texas A&M too, but again, I don't think he has the size and the length that Chicago's looking for. But any of those 4 guys I think would fit the bill. And I think that bodes really well for Chicago because I feel pretty strongly that at least 2 of those 4 guys I mentioned could be available at 25. I mean, I think something maybe Mesidor or Falk will both be off the board, but I think Parker and Young should both be there by the time Chicago's on the clock.
The Bears have not taken a edge rusher in the first 50 picks in the top 50 since Leonard Floyd, 9th overall in 2016,
Oof.
which is kind of surprising considering how much of a premium position it is. Also, no Bears defensive tackle earned over a 60 PFF overall grade this season. So I think we've discussed, but their defensive tackle rotation is kind of a bunch of mids at this point in time. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure they've done anything so far this offseason to change that. I know you did a recent mock draft with the PFSN mock draft tool, and you had the Bears trading out of 25 and trading down, and I believe it was to draft Cassius Howell. Is that correct?
So it was who did I have? It was Kristen
Or Zion
Miller.
Young? Kristen. Okay, yeah.
Kristen Miller. So I
So
did, yeah.
go ahead.
No, you're good. So I did have them trading down. I mean, obviously I spent a lot of time in, the PFSN mock simulator. Just I don't know, for fun, honestly, but I think that I looked at that. I got an offer from the computer. It was like, all right, we'll give you a 3rd round pick this year and a 2nd round pick in 2027 to move down from 25 to 48. And the way that I saw it is in this class, I think that a pick that you make at 25 is going to be like at a similar caliber to what you get at 50 or something like that. And I think really the strength of this class comes in like how deep it is. And I thought that having another opportunity to get an extra top 100 pick gives you another top potential like prospect, a potential starter. So what I did is, yeah, I moved down to 48. I took Kristen Miller, the D tackle from Georgia, and then with my 2 second rounders, I went Gabe Yakis out of Illinois, and then Sam Hecht, the center out of Kansas State. And then I happen to have an extra third that I used on Jalen Kilgore, the safety from South Carolina. And then with Chicago's own third round pick, I took Brennan Thompson, the receiver out of Mississippi State, who had the fastest 40-yard dash at the combine. So I went in that direction. I wouldn't at all be mad if they do something similar to that. I mean, I don't know if anyone's going to give up that much to trade, to make that steep of a trade up from like 48 to 25 in this class. But I certainly think, I mean, even if you remove the 2027 second from the mix, I think getting an extra third round pick would be awesome in this class because I think that within the top 100, there's not a massive discrepancy between, the guys that you'd get in the second round and the guys you get in the third round. And uh, I think that the lack of blue chip prospects in this class uh, means the top guys will go at the top, but there are just a lot of guys, in my opinion, that kind of just blend together. And if you
Yeah.
have more swings of the bat in that range, I mean, at least in my opinion, the better off it's going to be.
Yeah, just to kind of summarize what you just said, and I completely agree. Basically, aside from Ruben Bain and David Bailey, like, if you're not able to draft one of those two guys, then it's hard to figure out the range for the rest of that group. And that's where the Bears are. They're 25. They're going to have no shot at Ruben Bain or David Bailey unless they're, mortgaging a future in order to do that. And they feel that good about one of those two guys. Those are two top 15 picks. So, to me, I think the idea of entertaining a trade down at 25 is probably the move, unless you've fallen in love with one of these guys, whether it's a Peter Woods or a Caden McDonald or a Keldrick Falk or a Key Messidor or Zion Young. I mean, which again, I'm not sure is likely because there's every one of those guys we just talked about has the type of potential to be like an elite player, but also like there's definite weaknesses there. So
Yeah.
let's talk specifically about some of these guys: Akeem Messidor, Zion Young, T.J. Parker. Let's talk about those three. Those are three you brought up. Now, Messidor to me makes a ton of sense because one of the biggest weaknesses with him, it should actually be a strength for the Bears, and that is you need a ready-made pass rusher. We talked about the potential of adding a veteran in free agency because you need a guy that like has already proven he can do it at this level. Well, Messidor is old, and that's his biggest weakness heading into this draft is he's too old. I think for the Bears, that makes a ton of sense where it's like, you've got a guy that we know, even, at his age can rush the passer. He played 6 years in college. He doesn't have any standout elite athletic traits, but like sometimes for me, like guys that don't have that and yet still get after the passer and have big time sack numbers, like there's something about that. And Messidor's been doing it for a long time, whether it was at West Virginia or then of course at Miami. So, but the question is 25 too high for him? Are you reaching too much?
I don't think so. I think that if Mesidor's there at 25, he'd be like at or near the top of my list. And for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, just because he's so polished at this stage, to me, it's a similar situation to Jared Verse coming out. I mean, they're two different
Great
players
point.
and two different body types, but I think that you look at someone like Verse coming out, where he was a little bit of an older prospect. He was so refined in terms of how deep his pass rushing arsenal was, how many moves that he could use, his ability to generate counters and work off of his, first move and then deliver a second from there. I think you see a lot of the same in Mesidor. You have NFL level physicality and play strength right out of the gate with him. And I mean, yeah, he is an older prospect. So it's like, oh, by the time his rookie deal's up, it's what, like 28, 29. Uh, but at the same time, I think that, I mean, even if it ends in like 7, 8 years of really good play at edge rusher,
Right.
that's still way better of an out that's still a much better outcome than a lot of other first round picks, because you think about how many first round picks don't pan out, how many first round picks do pan out, but the team doesn't want to sign them because they're too much money or something like that. Like, I think if you can get that out of Mesidor, like consistent high level starting ability for like even 7 8 years, and then you drop off from there, like I think that's a good problem to have, as opposed to taking, I mean, sure, you're going to have younger prospects in this class. Like Keldrick Falk still ranks pretty high on my board, but I have Mesidor higher because of his ability to contribute right out of the gate, or at least his projectability to do so. So I think you're right on the money in that the Bears need pass rushing production right away. And Mesidor is the type of guy who can do that. He could play against the run really well. He can set the edge. He's got the strength needed to stand his ground at the point of attack. Uh, and yeah, the the instincts, the handwork, the power, it's all really good. So that'd be a
Yeah.
pick I'd be 100% on board with at 25.
Anybody else of the TJ Parker, Zion Young, looking at the interior guys too, that you think would not be much of a reach at 25?
Yeah, I mean, I think either of those guys, Parker or Young, I think would be good value. I have Parker slightly ahead of Young. I mean, Young he had a DWI, which it's a slight ding. It all depends, I guess, on how teams evaluate that. Like, you know,
Right.
there are definitely worse off the field concerns to have, but I mean, still, it's something on the record.
It's
It's
something.
something you have
Right.
to, yeah, to keep in mind. Uh, but I think there's a lot to like with both. I mean, I think with Parker, you take a look at, okay, you hope the production is closer to 2024 than it is to 2025, but I thought the tape was still good in both plays, both seasons, even if Parker didn't have as many sacks. I still think that you saw the power, you saw the physicality, and I think he looked a tad quicker in the season before. But with Young, I think you're seeing that consistent upward trajectory, which has me liking him a lot, honestly, for the Bears at 25, where he can consistently get better. Looking back is what is one season as a starter at Michigan State was good. Then 24 he spent at Mizzou was strong. 25 was even better. And I think you always have, that physicality and that strength. I think he looked quicker in 25. He was more efficient at finishing plays and getting to the quarterback. I mean, he could always put pressure on the guy, but there's a lot to like there for sure with Zion Young. So Parker or Young are two guys I'd like in that mix. Like I said, Peter Woods, Kristen Miller, I think are two defensive tackles they'd look at there. Especially Woods. I mean, I know his pro day testing wasn't out of this world elite, but he's one of those guys where you just have to trust the tape, in my opinion. He wasn't a bad tester. It was just not. He just wasn't an elite tester. And I think you see the tape. He plays a lot quicker than he runs in the 10-yard split, and he's a lot more decisive than his athletic testing might show, which means he's able to maximize what he has to work with really well. So, and I think
Mm.
any of those guys at 25, I think would be a good value.
Yeah, and Zion Young, I mean, at 6'6", 260 pounds, like it's also, I think what you said in terms of just his ability to improve year over year, like that's got to fascinate you. And then like the size, I mean, just jumps off the page at you as a guy like, oh, here's another, big time athlete, long, lanky, like those are characteristics you love. And with Woods, I'm still with you. Like I still would love Woods at 25. I think like if you liked Woods at 25 and then you didn't like his combine, it feels like you just haven't, like you haven't been paying attention because you knew he probably wasn't going to test well based on things you just said. But the tape,
Yeah.
like trust the tape in that one. I totally agree with you there. What about a guy, and this isn't for 25. I think now we should look further in that next group, which would probably include Danny Dennis Sutton, Gabe Akis, Cassius Howell. Um, what's your feeling on that? Derek Moore from Michigan,
Yeah.
Christian
So I
Miller,
mean,
you talked a lot about.
yeah. I mean, we got a lot of guys, in that range as well. I think that if you go with like say in the second round, if you take a defensive lineman there, I mean, there's a very good chance, they end up taking a defensive lineman in round one, whether it's a D tackle or an edge, and then they take the other in the second round with one of those two picks. I think that's entirely possible. So it's good to do your due diligence on that side. My top choice, at least off the edge, would be Derek Moore. I think he's someone where I came away really impressed with his quickness when I watched the 2024 tape, but I think he did a better job in 25 of really improving his power and how efficient he is on the long arm and the bull rush. Uh, I think that, you see the relentlessness that he plays with. I think he'd be a really good fit in Chicago. Malachi Lawrence as well at UCF is somebody I'd include in that mix where, judging off of how well he tested, how good the pre-draft processes look for him, I wouldn't be totally shocked if he's not even there when the Bears pick in, with those second round picks. But if he is there, he's someone you have to consider. Uh, Dennis Sutton and Dennis Sutton and Yakus, I think it's two different guys, two different types of athletes,
Yeah.
or at least the way that they're built. I think DDS is, naturally quicker, and I think he's taller. He's got more of the prototypical size, but I think Yakus is more refined at this stage in terms of we talk about the counters, we talk about the instincts as a pass rusher, and even setting the edge against the run too, having the ability to set the edge, to know when a running back's coming up his gap, when and how to free up his hands
Mm.
to make the play against the run. I think he's someone where it's really a it's a pick your poison sort of deal, but not in a bad way. It's two different types of guys where DDS is maybe a little bit more raw, but I think he has more athletic upside. So
Well, it's
yeah,
interesting too
at
because
least off the edge.
it's interesting too because they have similar builds. They're both long and pretty good size. I think DDS is close to 6'5", 265. Akis is 6'4", 260. Long arms. It does feel like Akis is more physical.
Mhm.
I mean, he's just a load, and so maybe it's basically like the DDS could be your elite pass rusher with those traits, whereas Akis is maybe more of a run stuffer than a pass rusher in terms of 1-1. And then there's Cassius Howell,
Yeah.
11 and a half sacks last year, second in the SEC, 11 and a half. Seems like the type of guy that maybe he's just a one-trick pony, but that one trick is pretty good.
100%. I mean, I think you're looking at, true situational pass rusher right out of the gate. You see the explosiveness with him, the flexibility, how quick his hands are. He wins a lot more with finesse than he does with power for sure.
Mm.
But I think that, he's so good with finesse that I think he's going to be able to carve out a niche for himself in the pros for sure. Uh, I think he'll still go round one, even with the okay play strength, and he's got short arms, obviously, so that's something you have to factor in. But I think that you watch the tape as a situational pass rusher, if that's what you need, he's someone who
Mm.
can fit that bill really well with the potential to be more down the line. So I think he'll go round one. I don't know if the Bears would circle him in the first round just because there are other edge rushers who, way better fits in terms of like the physical archetype and the style of play that Allen typically likes in his defenses. But uh, I mean, Howell's a hell of a player, and I think that at a certain point, like you're saying, if he does fall into round two, and for some reason, I don't think he will. I don't think he should, at least. But if he's there at 57, if he's there at 60, you have to consider it, in my opinion. So I don't know. He's one of those guys where the scheme fit isn't perfect, but I think at once you reach a certain point in the draft, I think the talent level's too much to overcome.
Well, and that's maybe where the Bears will have, and it be in an advantageous position because if there's somebody they like that they liked at 25 that they thought might be there at the end of the second, and then they get some intel that says he's not, like I'd be perfectly fine with the Bears moving up, packaging their 2 second-round picks in order to move up in the second round to get a guy they really like. If it's a Cassius Howell, if it's Zion Young, wherever. Now, granted, you want them to take players at those picks, but I'm just saying, like, if there's a guy they really like and they have the arsenal to move up, like I would think, having those 2 late second-round picks would be enough to move up to get a guy in that spot. How many edge rushers do you think go in the first round? Like true defensive ends?
I think it's going to end up being 6. And it could be, 6, it could be 7. I don't think it's going to be more than that, but I'm going to go with 6. I think, Bain and Bailey are locks. I think Mesidor and Falk will go round 1. And
I was gonna
then
say
I think
so who's your 3? Who's your DN 3?
so my DN3 is Mesidor. So he's my third, and then I've Bain first, Bailey second, and then Mesidor third. And I have Arvell Reese as a linebacker, so I'm not counting him in this. I mean, if you want to, then that's another one you can chalk up for
Right.
the edge rushers. But I think you're really looking at it, 2 of Howell, Parker, and Young going in the first round. And I think all those guys are good enough to where you can make a strong argument for all of them to be in the first round. Uh, so I feel pretty good about 2 of them being in the mix, but all 3, I don't know for sure. So I'll just hedge my bets and say 6.
Well, and look, I mean, I think when you listen to analysts or talk to people, like 6, 7 is a pretty good number in terms of ends coming out, and you wonder at what point with the Bears at 25, how many will still be available on the board at that point, right? Like I talked earlier, like Mesidor at 25, and you've got him as your third, but I've thought he's going to slip because of the age thing, and then because of the combine, he just didn't measure well, right? I mean, so curious kind of how that plays into it. But again, I think as we've discussed, like don't overthink it. Like this is a guy that's proven over time that like he's going to be able to rush the passer, which ultimately is a huge priority in that first round. And given first round is traditionally meant for, left tackle, right tackle, quarterback, and pass rush, we know the quarterback is not deep in this draft. So one will be gone for sure, maybe 2 in the first round, which leaves, okay, defensive end and offensive tackles, the 2 premium positions that teams are going to want to take. So, it kind of comes down to, I think 6 or 7 is probably the perfect number because of that. Like huge priority for teams. It always is. It is a premium position you take in the first round. And given that there's not that many quarterbacks in this draft, especially at the top, that, it makes that position even more premium.
100%. And selfishly, I wished for the Bears that this was a better quarterback class, just so you could have some of the more premium positions drop a little bit into their laps. But I mean, you work with the cards that you're dealt, and other than I think Mendoza's going to go, before Mendoza will go 1, but maybe Simpson you're looking at out of Alabama, and then that's it as far as quarterbacks who will go before 25. So I still think there should be a good amount of talent available for the Bears at 25. And then having those 2 second round picks in this type of class, I think is going to be super helpful. But yeah, I mean, I just wish that, I wish the quarterbacks were a little bit stronger this year. So that's something that
Right.
maybe, defer to 2027, with all the guys that are in that class with, all the potential that's there. Hopefully you can get maybe a higher caliber prospect at 25 next go around, or when the Bears pick at 32 in the 2027 NFL draft after they win the Super Bowl, obviously, then maybe they'll, start to, maybe they'll have some blue chip, well, not blue chip, but still high level players falling into their lap there.
All right. If you are watching us live on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button. And of course, jump in the comments. If you are listening to us on podcast, make sure to like the podcast and give us a good review here on the Second City Gridiron podcast page. I want to get to some of these comments though in real time. Howie R. Bears has been in the chat and he's killing it today. He's big on Malachi Lawrence. All right. So we see you, Howie. We agree, especially myself as I cover the Big 12 and have watched Malachi Lawrence. What's your read, Jacob, on Malachi? Where do you have him in terms of your defensive ends?
Yeah, so off of edge rushers, I have him as a round 2 guy. I don't I'm kind of in that in between where I don't know, it's like a 50-50 to me that he's going to end up at 57 or 60. I think you're looking at tremendous length with him, off the edge, like 35-inch arms. He's got the raw ability you can see on tape to, once he gets his hands right, it's really tough for offensive tackles to get inside his chest because his arms are so long he can just lock you out. Uh and because of that, he's got a good bull rush. He's got a good long arm move that he could use. He can utilize that long arm stab and transition it into a bunch of different moves as well. He's got good quickness off the ball. I think from a physical perspective, Lawrence is just about everything you want. Uh, Maybe he's not incredibly flexible. I think there are some times where his pad level can pop up a little too high, and I think that can affect his flexibility. At the top of his arc as a pass rusher. And I do think that sometimes, maybe his speed to power could be a little bit better. I think that, he's got good raw power, but he doesn't always maximize it because of his, him being taller and not having a ton of bend in his knees and his lower half. Uh, but I think the physical attributes are all there with Lawrence. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if someone in like the top 40 takes a shot on him. I think that, maybe he's a little bit more of a project, so to say, than like your Ruben Baines or your David Bailey's. But I think that he has the physical upside rather really to really impress some coaches in the NFL. So if I wouldn't be super stoked with him at 25. I'd be ecstatic with him at 57 or 60.
Yeah, and I wonder though, because of what he did at the combine, if that like would have taken him from like a late day 2 guy, to a day 3 or 4 guy. I because in watching him, I mean, he's got the physical attributes, and he rushes the passer exceedingly well. Like his ability and his motor are really good. The one thing that stands out though is he's not really good against the run. Now, again, when we're not talking about top 10, top 15, top 20 picks. All these guys are flawed when especially you're talking at 57 or 60.
Yeah.
But he missed a lot of tackles, and you wonder, like, I mean, does he like the contact? That's my question, right? I mean, some guys just love it and thrive in it, but I think his missed tackle rate was pretty significant, especially when it comes to his ability to set the edge and be a good run defender, and that's the college level, right? So you come to the NFL and you have a 22% missed tackle rate on running plays. That's concerning. But again, we're not talking about guys that are perfect, because these prospects that you get deeper in this draft, like you're trying to find guys that are clearly flawed or have flaws that outperform those flaws when you get to the league, because that's what happens. But nobody
Yeah.
going into this draft that we're talking about 57 through 60 is going to be flawless. That's kind of why they're going to be available potentially, at the end of the second round.
100%. Yeah. And I think that too, you see that a lot with defensive linemen where, if they, like I said, if they struggle with pad level, like with Lawrence, then it goes
Good
to your
point.
point, then they can, that can lead to missed tackles because your form as a tackler isn't, ideal. Like you're not getting your weight underneath you. You're not getting your knees bent. You're not getting ready necessarily. Like you look at Javon Dexter. I mean, I know it's interior compared to the edge, but that's been a big issue with Dexter is the fact that his, center of gravity is so high and his,
Yeah.
he doesn't have very good pad level. Really good athlete. He can rush, he can sack the quarterback better than, most defensive tackles, but he's a liability against the run because his pad level isn't, his ability to win with leverage isn't very good. And I think
Mm.
that, it's not quite to that same extent with Lawrence, but it does show up for sure. So, like exactly like you said, anybody you're talking about with in that that second round range, nobody's going to be flawless. Everyone's going to have something. But and depending on your view on what you prioritize certain traits at certain positions, you're going to sour on a certain prospect, or you're going to be overly high on a certain prospect because oh, this guy's faster than the other guy, or this one's stronger than the other guy, whatever your preference might be. But
Yeah.
Lawrence has a lot to like, so I think he's someone. He's day two for me. Uh, I love, the upside that he brings to the table. And, like I said, if it's 57 or 60, I'd be on board with that for sure.
What about Lee Hunter?
Lee Hunter. So that's an interesting one for me. I have him like an early round two guy. I think that there's a lot of flash with him. Uh, Obviously, you see just, he's a big dude, 325, 330 pounds, just a nuts athlete for a guy that as big as he is. Naturally, I think, in a combine setting, people are going to look at the relative athletic score and see, oh, Lee Hunter didn't score all that great. But I think that, that the RAS is historically not very kind to nose tackles just because, I
Mm.
mean, that's not their game, right? They're heavier than everyone.
Right.
They're physical at the point of attack. They do a good job of, plugging up gaps. They're not, they're not running a 4.8 as a nose tackle. They're not jumping 40 inches in the air or something like that. Uh, but Hunter, I think, the raw power's there, the quickness, the closing speed off, for a guy that size, how he can move in space is really encouraging. I like some of what he brings to the table in terms of his hands too. I think, he can
Mm.
utilize those push pulls well against the run game. He's got a good swim move too that I like from time to time. Obviously has the strength and the raw mass just to take blocks head on and to stand his ground. I'd like to see him, push the pocket a little bit better with speed to power. I think part of that comes down with, pad level. Uh, and where you have the raw strength that he works with, but I don't think he truly knows how to maximize all of it yet. Uh, and again, he's another guy where it's like I think he can pressure the quarterback, but I don't think his sack numbers are ever going to be amazing. So if that's something you're looking
Yeah.
for at defensive tackle, that's probably not your guy. But I think Hunter has the potential to be like a high level nose tackle. I think it just might take a year or two for him to truly come into his own. So we'll
Yeah.
see. Obviously, how that all turns out. But I like Hunter. I don't know if he's going to fit what the Bears need enough to the point where you consider him at 25. But I think there's going to be a team like early in round two that needs just a physical run stuffer that's going to be really happy with taking Hunter there.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get to the end of the show today, and we appreciate everybody's participation, joining us each and every week right here on the Second City Gridiron YouTube channel, and of course the Second City Gridiron podcast page. We are Jacob Infante, Ari Temkin, in the Chicago Draft Room, getting you ready for the 2026 NFL Draft. The Bears are on the clock at 25. But I wanted to get into some of these scouting reports you've been doing on X. And if you're not following Jacob on X, which I'm assuming you are already, but you're not doing it right, he's done great work in terms of deep dives into players that he thinks may be attractive to the Bears and some guys that from positions that we may not be thinking about. So I'm going to go away from some of the guys you've done this on that we were thinking about, but do a kind of a couple of deep dives here with uh, Marlon Klein, the tight end from Michigan, who's Colston Loveland's former teammate, and a guy that, again, probably don't think too highly of tight end in this draft, but a guy that could be a Durham Smythe replacement.
Yeah, I mean that was my thinking exactly. Where Durham Smythe left, you're looking now. The tight end three is, I think, Steven Carlson, and I mean he's played on on game days for the Bears, but I think you can certainly upgrade in that regard. And with how much the Bears use Durham Smythe, at least as a run blocker, I
Yeah,
think
right.
that you can, it's worth using a day three pick on. I mean, I know that, they gave away their fifth, uh, they only have their fourth and then the 2 sevenths. Maybe if they trade back, and pick up an extra fourth or a fifth, then you do go with a tight end in that regard. So Marlon Klein is one of those guys. Maybe it's just me. I'm a sucker for blocking tight ends who test really well. Like if I know you can block, if I know that you can establish yourself on the edge, if I know that you can climb to the second level and dominate those linebackers, that's one thing. But if you test really well and you have those raw athletic talents to work with, even if you're not a polished prospect as a receiver, it shows that there's upside to work with. And I think that's what you're looking at with Klein, where he's been, Michigan's run, or they ran so many, two tight end sets. Uh, where Colston Loveland was running routes and Klein would be in pass protection, or both Loveland and Klein would be run blocking. And I think this year you saw a little bit more of what Klein can do flexed out of the slot. And obviously he's no as a pure route runner, he's not at the level that Loveland is, or else he'd be, a first round pick.
Top 10
But
pick, right?
yeah, but you can see the fluidity across, the middle of the field on the seam is good. The ability to stretch the field vertically is good. He ran a 4.61 at the combine, which is, that's strong time for a tight end. I think he's someone who he's going to find a way onto the field pretty quickly, especially if there's a team that likes using multi tight end sets. I mean, obviously the Bears do. So if they
Yeah,
reunite Klein and Loveland, and obviously you have Cole Kmet in the mix there as well, I'd be very happy with it. So he's someone that I think he'll maybe go like round four, like late round four, early round five. If I'm an NFL team, I'd be comfortable taking him as early as round three. I think
wow,
yeah, there's a lot of upside there. And in a game where, you're starting to establish the run a little bit more, having a tight end who
great
can
point.
block is, I think even more helpful than it was, say, 5 years ago or so.
Speaking of running the ball well, another position that maybe Bears fans don't think the Bears will focus in on, but I think it's always a good idea late in drafts to look at running back. How about a running back that most people will know, of course, because of what he did with the Indiana Hoosiers? Kalon Black is another guy you did a breakdown of. 5'10", 210-pound guy that started at JMU with Kurt Signetti, then came over to Indiana with him and had 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, averaging 5.6 per carry last year for the national champions.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that Black's in production was really impressive, especially when you consider, he was splitting touches with, not just Roman Hemby, who's, another likely draft pick in this class, but a good handful of other guys in the mix too. So the fact that Kalen Black was able to surpass 1,000 rushing yards is really impressive to me. I mean, he's a guy where I kind of wish he got a combine invite. I feel like he definitely should have, because I feel pretty likely he's going to get drafted on day three. Uh, I don't know if he would have tested insanely well, because that's not really his game, but I think he's someone, he's a tough runner. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's uh, shoot, like maybe five,
5'10".
yeah, 5'10", give or take, like 210 pounds, somewhere around that range. Uh, but he runs tough. And I think that he's got a low center of gravity, and that helps him bounce off of, arm tackles and stuff like that. He's a patient runner. I like how he adjusts the tempo, out of the backfield, where he doesn't rush into decisions. He waits for the play to develop in front of him, and then when the time is right, that's when he decides to accelerate and make the big play. Uh, he's got quick feet too. I think maybe, the long speed isn't out of this world good, but I think he can change direction and make defenders miss pretty well. So I think in a zone scheme of fish, especially like, what Chicago has, they're heavier on zone in the run game. I think Kalen Black could do a pretty good job there. So he's someone, like you said, maybe the Bears aren't going to draft a running back super high. I'm cool with that for sure. I like what they have with Swift and Monangai, but if say Black is available in round 7 or something like that, and you want to have a guy to push Roshan Johnson, where he didn't really do too much last year, I'd be on board with that for sure.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the shelf life of running backs in the NFL is so short, and you can have guys that have career years for you, and like, I don't think you take the Bears are not in position here to be taking a running back unless it's a 7th round pick. Obviously, at this point, because of the draft capital, one, but two, because you seem pretty set there in terms of your top two guys, but like things change quickly, and at the running back position especially, and it's a very disposable position. So I'm the type that thinks you can never have too many, especially you can never take too many in the draft, especially if you're talking about like 7th round picks that are normally throwaways anyways. All right, before we finish out the show today, I want to get to some of these other ones from these prospect breakdowns you did on social, including a couple of centers. These are two guys you've talked a lot about, and that's Slaughter from Florida and Sam Hecht from K-State.
Yeah, I mean, both very talented players. I'll start with Slaughter, because I think that his ceiling is maybe a little bit lower, just because I don't think he's as fluid of a mover, or not, maybe not as fluid of a mover, but as flexible, I guess is the better way to put it. Because he does accelerate well off the line of scrimmage. I think as a down blocker, as a reach blocker, I think there's a lot to like in that regard. He's a smart center, which, I mean, the intelligence at that position can't go understated. With his ability to keep his head on a swivel in pass protection, to process stunts and blitzes and things of that nature. And then as a run blocker, understanding what his assignment is, whether it's zone or gap. I think he does a good job there too. Uses his hands well. I mean, I think, the flexibility is a little bit of an issue. The pads run a little too high sometimes. And I think that, the body control is still solid, but I think the pad level is more of an issue in terms of maximizing his strength, where he's not an elite finisher at the point of attack. So that's something where he's not going to have too many like highlight pancake blocks necessarily, but he's just a rock solid, intelligent football player. And then if I go to Hecht,
Well, let me ask you this first. What's the range for
yeah,
both of these guys?
yeah. So Slaughter, I think, I mean, it's interesting because I saw the NFL website isn't incredibly high on him. Like the combine grade or whatever, ended up being like pretty strongly day 3. But I think Slaughter could go, I'd be comfortable taking him late round 3. Maybe round 4 is a little bit better of range, but I think that round 3 is perfectly acceptable too. Hecht, I think, is someone goes a little bit higher. I think maybe, there's a chance he could go late round 2. Maybe he's there early mid round 3. I don't think he's going to be there with the Bears third round pick there as it stands. But I mean, Hecht is someone where, you look at a lot of the things that Drew Dalman does well or did well during, his season with the Bears, what he was able to execute there. It's the coordination, the body control, and the intelligence. I think that Hecht has all of those. And he's another one of those guys. He doesn't have super long arms. He's not incredibly powerful. He's not someone who's going to get like consistently drive guys off, get defensive tackles, drive them, bury them into the dirt. But he's such a coordinated blocker on the move. Does a good job of, taking precise angles, landing his hands properly and knowing how to roll his hips through contact to seal off defenders in the run game. Moves well, accelerates well to the line of scrimmage. And again, like I mentioned with Slaughter, he's got that same level of spatial awareness and intelligence as a blocker in pass pro, but as in as a run blocker as well. So either one of those guys, I'd be very happy with if I'm the Bears. They're probably not starting right away. Like, you're probably starting Bradbury, but Bradbury's going to be a free agent in 2027. You're going to have some decisions to make about guys you want to bring back. Uh, I could see Hector Slaughter standing out as, a potential option for, like a successor, so to speak, for Bradbury down the line.
Yeah, and I mean, they just can't miss on that position, point blank. Like they
Yeah.
cannot afford to have missed with Bradbury on that position. So it almost feels like an insurance policy too. And maybe again, we talked about this, I think, with when it came to Ozzie on the left tackle, like maybe what they do in their approach in the draft will tell us how they feel about the center position. If they do decide to prioritize center, maybe that's one of them. All right. Before we go, one more that you did, and this is a position we've talked a lot about, but a guy we haven't talked yet about, and that's Oklahoma's defensive tackle, Grayson Halton.
Yeah, I mean, Halton's a really fun player. He's someone I think that we talked about, with those defensive tackles where we talk about, okay, maybe McDonald's not a great fit because he's not an uphill, upfield penetrator or something like that on passing downs. I think Halton is someone who fits that bill. So I'm looking at him at 57 or 60 and going like, all right, this is what Dennis Allen likes at the position. He's, a really good athlete, super quick off the ball, his not just his short area acceleration, but his closing speed and space too is really, really good for a defensive tackle. So if you're talking about, quarterbacks who can, extend the play, they're scrambling in the pocket, Halton's someone who can chase those guys down. Plays with a really high motor. I love the quickness and the activity he has in his hands at the point of attack. He's constantly working to make a play and to, disengage. There are definitely concerns about the size. I mean, he's, doesn't have very long arms, and that hurts him sometimes where he can get locked out at the line of scrimmage. The strength is just okay. I mean, like there are definitely flashes of, okay, he can, push the pocket or something like that, but he doesn't pack a massive punch compared to other defensive tackles in this class. I think he can get washed out by double teams in the run game pretty easily. But if you want a pass rusher at defensive tackle, Holton's your guy. And if you're not going with one in round one, there's a lot to like with him in that perspective. And I think he's someone who can make an impact in the rotation pretty quickly. And then eventually, as he starts to get a little bit stronger, perhaps you look at him as a 3-down guy.
I think also like these players don't, like, this doesn't happen in isolation. You have to look at the programs they come from, the coaches they play for. Brent Venables is a guy that, is flawed as a head coach, but this is one of the best defenses in the SEC last year. Venables, going back to his time at Clemson as the DC, like, dude knows defense. He knows defensive players. So there's almost like a trust factor of like, if I'm getting a guy from his program, then he's identified that guy as having good traits and can use them in a way that's productive. Like, I think he's the type of guy Venables is that, there's a lot of you have to, again, I think you have to look at a lot of these guys and not just their numbers, but also where they're playing and who the coaches are playing for and their influences, because whether offense or defense, there's guys with certain credibility that tend to churn out certain positions that work, so you got to look at that too. All right. Appreciate everybody joining us on today's show. Of course, we go for an hour each week talking Chicago Bears draft. Thanks, of course, to the great Dr. Jacob Infante, as you've been called multiple times here in the chat. I am Ari Temkin. Make sure to check out all the great work at WindyCityGridiron.com. And of course, the Second City Gridiron podcast and YouTube channels. Make sure to like and subscribe. But for now, we're out. Talk to you next week. Peace.